That tribe, that team first mentality, that want to look after your mates it's born from hardship. It's born from death and dying. It's born from doing those hard yards, wanting to look after everyone around me before myself.
Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
The single greatest sacrifice I've made is my family.
We weren't out there to take country. We were out there to lose it. That was their job.
I did feel a lot of regret.
Friends were still getting killed.
It got to the point where, you're going to funerals quite often.
Do I lead under fire?
And that was a heavy responsibility, I guess, on my shoulders that I didn't want to screw up.
You have to be resilient to be able to cope.
War itself is horrific. It's a horror story. It should never be dressed up as if it's something glorious.
Not what you can do for yourself, but what can you do for your country.
The volunteer for service was in effect to put your life on the line.
Ant Plater is a veteran of the 2nd Commando Regiment. The former Special Forces operator served in the Australian Defence Force for 27 years, 17 of which were with the Commandos. He deployed to Somalia, Bougainville, East Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan, served in the Tactical Assault Group East, and was the counter-terrorism advisor to the Australian Federal Police. Today, he's a high-performance consultant for the Canberra Raiders and an advocate for the Commando Welfare Trust. Ant spoke with me over Zoom, with his dog sometimes piping up in the background during the chat. We spoke about his journey to the Army and Special Forces, some of his deployments, the idea of tribe, and being a leader at the tip of the spear. Welcome to Life on the Line. I'm Alex Lloyd, speaking over Zoom today with Ant Plater. Ant, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Alex. We've been trying to catch each other for a while now, so it's good to finally catch up and have a decent conversation.
Great to finally have you on mic. So, Ant, let's go right back to the start. Where did you grow up?
That's a really interesting question for me. So I was born in Griffith in New South Wales, and then I think about the age of 3, I moved with my folks, moved to Sydney from the age of about 5 till I was about sort of early teens, pretty much on the road. So my folks are chefs, so we travelled Australia, spent some time in Tasmania, some time in Perth, and then probably those early teens, up until I joined the Army, I was in Katherine and the Northern Territory. So I guess quite fortunate to see a lot of Australia, as a young kid, which was an amazing experience.
Yeah, it's quite a varied, well-rounded, life experience-filled childhood. When you start to gravitate towards that military interest in your late teens, you were saying, do you know where that comes from? Like, do you have family military history, or did you always just find a sort of that natural boyhood interest in soldiering and military stuff, or a combination?
I guess my dad and one of my uncles were in the Army, and then spent some time in the regular Army, and then they transferred to Army Reserve. Didn't go to Vietnam, but I guess the biggest influence was from my Uncle Don. So he was an infantryman, served in Korea, Malaya, Borneo and Vietnam. And he I think he got out sort of early 80s, but even before he got out, and then when he got out, we had some really solid, robust conversations about military service, what it was all about. Yeah, so that was probably my biggest influence, was my Uncle Don, and his sort of, leading me direction into, joining the Army perhaps.
Did your uncle, because that's quite an extensive service record, did he talk about some of his experiences with you when you were growing up, or did that more happen a bit later in life, perhaps once you put on the uniform?
Yeah, probably a little bit of both. So I spent some time with my Uncle Don. Once he retired, he lived at Canberra, funny enough. He had a property up there. We spoke a little bit about his time away, but he didn't speak a lot about his deployments. It was mainly about sort of when he was, a CSM in 3RR, and then went on to be promoted to when I was Class 1. And he spoke about sort of the transition time, and the Army was transitioning from greens into camouflage uniform. He was telling me about he was involved with the first trials of camouflage and all the different aspects, and R&D, that was the research and development that was involved. So he sort of skimmed a lot. I'm pretty sure he carried a fair bit of baggage from those deployments. So he didn't sort of touch a great deal, but enough to sort of spike my interest in, this is something I really want to invest some time in and perhaps join as a young kid.
Did you get to learn enough, even if not from his own mouth, sort of which engagements or what areas of career he might have been in, and you can do your own reading on that as such, or is it all a bit of still of a mystery to you?
It's all still a bit of a mystery. Like, I've spoken to my auntie a little bit. Don's no longer with us. Yeah, there's not a great deal of information, and I've done my own sort of research a little bit through the Australian War Memorial, and through information that my parents have given me, and Don's brothers and sisters. So, as I said, there was enough interest there, and he was a really proud man. A really regimental soldier, I'd say. Well, from my perspective, he was, even though he, back in those days, deployments and stuff. So, but I always remember he was very proud of his service. The achievements he achieved whilst he was in uniform, and I still pay obviously my respects to him. Through his service and my service. So it was a good time. Yeah, it was a good time to sort of reflect on his service.
And was your dad a cook in the army, or did the chef trade come after hanging up the uniform or when he went reserves?
No, he was a cook in the army. So he, I think back then they could do their trade, and then once he got out, he, all the qualifications he didn't have, he went and did an abridged version of a chef's apprenticeship, and then got fully qualified, and then spent close to about 45, 50 years in the industry.
Well, I'm sure he found that gratifying compared to cooking in the mess versus, what you might do in the back kitchens of a nice restaurant. But that sounds great that the army, and that's something they promote today, that you can learn skills and trades and then transfer that into the real world. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the strengths of, time in service is, taking those skills that you learn and transferring them to, civilian skills, so you can, get out and hit the ground running, so to speak.
So what year is it that you put your own hand up, Ant?
Initially in 1987, I actually applied to join the Navy. Went through all the testing, got to the end, and they said I wasn't successful. I said, no dramas, that's fair enough. Went back to school for a little bit, and then I reapplied sort of mid 1988 and was accepted. Very quickly found myself on the bus down to Kapooka in October 88.
So yes, you disembark and you change. Was that just you realising the army was perhaps a better fit for you, or you just didn't like the seasick lifestyle?
To be honest, I'm not really sure what drew me. I think maybe it was further engagement with my uncle, or maybe it was just, right, the Navy doesn't want me, I'm going to try the army now. And, perhaps I should have joined the army, initially without sort of looking at the Navy. There was some interesting stuff that looked interesting in the Navy initially. Obviously didn't get accepted. So, found myself at Kapooka dragging my bag up to the lines straight off the bus with a recruit instructor in my face yelling expletives at me pretty quickly.
Yeah, so the late 80s, the good old days, they'll be regarded by many, I'm sure. So what are some of those highlight memories you have from that? Being yelled at, a lot of PT, and learning all the basic skill sets that would become the cornerstone of your life for years to come.
Absolutely. I was a young kid. I think I was the youngest or the second youngest in the platoon. My birthday's in September, so I was like 17 and about 4 weeks old at the time. So everything was it was this massive steep learning curve. For example, like learning to shave and, morning routine, and having to eat a large meal in about 30 seconds flat, so you could, be outside lined up so they could yell at you again. Weapons lessons and fieldcraft and PT and all that sort of stuff. So it was a little bit of a blur. Like, I had a good bunch of guys in my room and stuff who sort of put me under their wing and dragged me along. But, a lot of those lessons back then created the man that I am today, and through my service, I really hold those lessons, close to my heart. It was, I think at the time you're a bit startled and it's information overload, but, looking back now, there's some really valuable lessons, and, I recommend it to any young kids who maybe, not necessarily have direction sorted in their life at this stage, and just go and sign up for 4 years and do your time. You can learn some valuable skills, get a bit of finance behind you. If you decide to stay on and continue on, great. If not, you've still got that experience behind you, and, you can take those lessons with you for the rest of life.
Well, it sounds like you have an immediate natural affinity for it. Do you go down the infantry route when it's up to initial employment training?
Yeah, absolutely. That was where I wanted to be. I didn't really think about any other corps, to be honest. I guess influenced by Don again. We only had one infantry instructor in the platoon. And, at the time, it's not really a focus until you get to sort of your core enlistment choices. And then it quickly became apparent, who the infantry guys were, and even before we were allocated our corps, we sort of formed little discussion groups, and I guess our own little bond of guys who wanted to go infantry within the platoon at the time.
It's interesting, though, that you've grown up with this influence from your dad and your uncle, and they all have their various service histories, and you're looking back as far as the early 1950s for some of that, and then you're joining the late 80s, toward the tail end of what is now referred to as the long peace period. And I guess you're joining up at a time where nothing's happened for a while. The instructors you had, if they've had some experience, it was a while ago, so they'll be also having some grey hairs sprouting. Was that a concern to you, or you just figured something would come along at one point?
I hadn't really thought about it, but it's something that I've dwelled on and thought about and written about, in my own diaries and stuff, which is so true. Like, coming out of, I guess, Vietnam, end of 75, and then, essentially the ADF didn't go anywhere till Somalia, which was in 93. So you've got, close to 18 or 19 years of being a peacetime defence force and a peacetime army, and the effect that had. I think the pace was so quick at recruit training and IETs that, operational experience wasn't, or opportunities to deploy wasn't really apparent. You just wanted to survive the day. You just wanted to survive the week. You just wanted to survive the course and then go on to the next course. And then, obviously rolled out of Kapuka up to Singleton for infantry IETs. And then that was another, okay, I've just got to survive this. It's 13 weeks. My section commander was a really hard guy from 3RR who absolutely beasted us every day. But again, some super valuable lessons. And he really taught us what being an infantry soldier was about. It was about being robust. It was about being able to think on your feet. It was about being able to, problem solve. It was about, mateship. It was about looking after your operator in your pit before you're looking after yourself. So, I've still got my notebooks full of notes and stuff that, he passed on to us. And obviously the lessons that you went through at School of Infantry. So, yeah, it was definitely an interesting time. Like, not a lot of operational experience was spoken about because there's that generation of soldiers who didn't deploy anywhere. There was the sort of odd trip here and there, but task force or unit level, there just was no deployments until we rolled into Somalia in 93.
And so we're at this point where you're in your late teens, coming into your early 20s. You've found somewhere that's just at home for you. You've got purpose, you're loving life, and you're learning all these great character building lessons. We've referred to Somalia a couple of times. That rolls around. What are your first memories of sort of hearing about there's a deployment and you're going to be part of it and it's to this country? Had you heard of Somalia? Did you know where that was on the map?
To be honest, no. Like, the battalion was actually on leave from December 92. I just finished up my time in Charlie Company 1 area, was posted internal posting to recon platoon, which was, again, I was super junior. Like, I was still wet behind the ears, still learning my trade as a rifleman. And the opportunity came to, within sort of 2 or 3 years of service to go to recon platoon, which I absolutely launched at because I loved, the court, doing the recon course and stuff. So Somalia sort of came on the horizon. We were all on leave. So I was in Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory visiting my parents who were contractors at the Tennant Creek gold mine. Obviously this is pre-mobile phones and, having a landline or mobile phone in your pocket or whatever. So a telegram arrives in the mail saying, make your way back to Townsville, best speed, jump on this flight, make this booking, use this reference number. So, yeah, it was just like, wow, this is going down. And then I sort of started to see it on the news and it was becoming a big talking point. Again, I had 1 or 2 days and I was back in Townsville. And then from that point on, it was just, it was confirmed pretty quick that we were going. And Alpha Company were to embark on the Tobruk to head over. I think they left Christmas Eve. I think, in fact, they embarked on Tobruk and then set sail for Somalia. And the rest of us sort of started to trickle in from mid to late January. And I think the battalion was complete on the ground in sort of early February. So there wasn't a lot of time, to be honest. It was just, battalion life sets you up for that structure anyway. Like, there's, DP1 checks and deployment checks and, you've got to have all your files and your dog tags and all that sort of basic deployment stuff all lined up. And we were the operational deployment battalion at the time, online with 1RR and 2-4 sort of taking in turn. So, we were prepared to deploy. But in terms of going into a place like Somalia, again, steep learning curve. And I was actually, because I was so junior in reconnaissance platoon, like generally this first appointment in the platoon is as the patrol SIG. So, carrying, radio equipment, heavy pack, blah, blah, blah. On the eve of us deploying, the patrol scout rolled his ankle very, very badly and basically had to stay behind. So I was quickly shuffled from patrol SIG up to patrol scout in a short space of time. So again, that was a steep learning curve for me, but my patrol commander, a guy by the name of Giles Blackman, he was fantastic. Like he was just a real leader, and we still speak today. So, he sort of really had the patrol finely tuned for operations in Somalia, or as much as we could be without sort of knowing a great deal about the place.
And the wider mission is to provide humanitarian aid and support for the local population and ensure things aren't escalating too out of hand there, essentially. What does that then translate for your platoon and what you're doing in a day-to-day level? Are you patrolling? What's your day-to-day life like there?
So we were tasked with the largest threat was, I guess what they were termed back then was bandits. What we call now is, terrorists or terrorism, to us being able to deliver food to the towns and villages that needed it. So our job was to conduct observation posts, conduct close reconnaissance on the track systems to make sure that, these bandits weren't infiltrating, or, after we'd done a food or after the rifle companies had done their food distribution, we'd be sort of stayed behind, covertly in an OP just to observe for, 6, 12, 24 hours just to see what the pattern of life was post a food distribution. So if bandits were coming to down and, holding, people at their will and taking the food, then we could then report that, and the battalion could act on that information that we were providing. So, staying, undetected or covert in Somalia was the biggest challenge because, obviously the farmers and stuff were pretty much anywhere and wandered through their own will. There was no sort of pattern of life to say, occupy this high ground and conduct an observation post, and there's a good chance of staying covert because they pretty much wandered everywhere. So that was, probably our biggest challenge. The threat of IEDs or mines, we didn't really call them IEDs back then. It was just mines. I mean, there was a lot of research done, prior to our deployments into Somalia and, what previous occupation it had looked like. And there was a mine threat there. We didn't come across any, thankfully, but, that was always, in the back of your mind in terms of, the next step you take and all that sort of stuff. So it was an interesting time.
Is there a particular moment that stood out to you at the time, or you look back on in reflection, where you've been doing this job for a few years and you've got probably some expectations and impressions of what it might have been like through your uncle and your dad, and then it clicks for you, I'm here, I'm a soldier, I'm representing Australia, and thankfully it's not in a war zone in the sense of something like Korea or Vietnam, but you're representing the country and getting to do the job you signed up for. Did you have that kind of thought process or emotion at any point?
I think every time that we went out on a job, whether it was us as a patrol, or sometimes we'd do joint patrol operations, or sometimes the whole platoon would go out, vehicle mounted, etc. Every time that we rolled outside the front gate, it was like, okay, this is what soldiering is about. This is what operations is about. So there was always a sense of this is soldiering. Like I'm at the pinnacle of my career. I hadn't really done a lot of research or, thought process into special forces or doing selection or anything like that. So it was just like, I'm at the top of the game here. I'm in reconnaissance platoon 1RAR doing the job. So that was at the forefront of every thought, every mission, every patrol, every time we rolled out, the front gate, whether it was into the township of Baidoa or whether it was, observation posts or close reconnaissance on the track systems, villages surrounding, your game face was on. When we left Australia, there was no time frame given. You're going for 6 months, you're going for 4 months. And we were there with a French-Canadian armoured unit or platoon or course line. I think they were a small course line. So that was cool. Like we were in Mogadishu and got to go to the CPX and, mixed with some other nations. Like there were some Italians there and, the French-Canadians and the Canadian guys. So before we knew it, the Qantas 747 was flying into Mogadishu, which is quite bizarre, to fly us all home. So it was, it was a quick transition, time to go, pack your gear, wash your gear, back to Mogadishu, some time on the ground, We're back on the plane. We're back in Townsville pretty quick. I don't recall a lot of the reception. Obviously, families and wives, girlfriends meeting us at the airport. It was a big moment. Everyone getting reunited. We quickly went on some leave, and then all right, we're going to get the the infantry combat badge. We're going to get the AASM, and all this sort of stuff was mentioned.
So this is in the first half of the 90s. 4 RARs about to be re-raised as a Commando Regiment in the 1996, 97. That process starts to kick off, and you just mentioned then that you hadn't started to think about Special Forces so much, because if you were, your options on the menu are 1st Commando Regiment part-time, so not really an option for what you're doing, or the Special Air Service Regiment over on the West Coast. When do you turn your eye to the Special Forces game in general, and is that first with Commandos once that starts to kick off again?
Yeah, so within that, recon sniper platoon, we had some absolute outstanding soldiers, and, before my time, during my time, and then, obviously after I left, I sort of posted back in and out of recon platoon doing, a 2ICs role, and then my last 3 years in recon, sort of 96 to 98, back as a patrol commander. In that space of time, there's a lot of guys going off to do selection for Perth. So seeing, I guess, those guys roll out, doing their 18, 20-odd day selection, coming back to the unit, started to tweak a little bit of interest, I guess, in terms of, well, what's this, Special Forces stuff about? It's the next step. And I guess everyone goes, well, I've ticked the box in terms of what I want to achieve in the battalion. I'm still young enough. I don't necessarily want to get posted out. I'm a junior NCO. It's either, the School of Infantry or back down to Kapuka are my options. So I think it was around about 97, 98 when I guess 4R Commando was starting to be raised and guys were going away and doing Commando selection. I think the first one was end of 97, perhaps start of 98.
Yeah, I think around then, because and you're not the first Somalia veteran who went to Commandos in those early 90 years I've spoken with. I like Bram Connolly, Wes Hennessy. There's a common trait here that's interesting, but carry on. So you're not quite in the first round then, but you hear about it going.
So, I was enjoying my time as being a recon patrol commander. We had an SAS squadron commander who was our company commander. He was a big influence on us and, giving us, extra training and weapons training and stuff to upskill us as recon soldiers. 97 recon platoon went to Perth for 2 weeks, and we were the guards on the interrogation course. So the guys had finished the SAS guys had finished their selection. They quickly go and do combat survival, and then they go into, it's about a week of interrogation training. And recon platoon went over as, I guess, the guards or Op 4 or enemy or whatever, whatever term you want to use it. So that was really interesting, mixing with SASR, NCOs, junior NCOs, senior NCOs, some of the officers who were sort of running training, and their influence or them trying to influence us to do selection, and just seeing what the guys went through. And again, it was, a lot of these guys I'd sort of spent time in recon platoon with, like Blaine Diddams, a couple of other guys who are still serving. They'd sort of spent time with us in recon platoon, going off and did SA selection, and then, we're bumping into these guys again on this interrogation course. So there was a whole core of us, I guess, group of us who were same, similar peer group. Some of us went to do SA selection, and others, including myself, went down the commando stream, but we're all of the same ilk, born out of a very talented recon platoon from 1RA and snipers as well. So it's interesting to look back on the names and you see where guys are now in those influential positions, still serving or out and are successful in the business world.
Indeed, it breeds quite an alumni that you're a part of. And what are your memories or experiences of that commando selection process? It's famous or infamous, I suppose. And how do you recall those days?
I trained extremely hard for because I'd sort of come out of the back of finished my time as a patrol commander in recon, was posted to the School of Infantry as an instructor, sort of end of 98. And then that sort of cemented, it was like, okay, I'm going to use my downtime here at Singleton to train for selection. And it was like the home of the infantrymen. So there was no better place to pack, march and train and bleed information off the PDIs about physical preparation, all this sort of stuff. So going on selection was fairly comfortable and confident in my ability to get through. I mean, there's always challenges that you don't sort of aren't aware of. And as like most guys, we focus on the physical preparation, but I was fortunate enough to speak to some guys who said, make sure you mentally prepare yourself as well. Do some research on mental and mental toughness and resilience and mindset, because that's the part that's going to be most challenged for someone like yourself on selection. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to get through reasonably unscathed. So quickly onto, I guess, the reinforcement cycle, and then into the world as a full-time commando.
It's one of those things where, besides the case of injury, normally the mind gives up far before the body, but you were forearmed with that thought process, went in, get through that, and then you're a fully fledged commando. And Australia's had a few more deployments during the 90s, mostly in the name of peacekeeping. You've probably got Timor around the corner now by this point in the timeline. So how's commando career looking for you at this early point, just sort of pre 9/11?
Obviously, as you see with guys who do selection now, they're reduced in rank. I think my selection was the last selection they did before we sort of reset for East Timor. So I retained my rank, and another lad who passed selection with me, we both retained our rank.
So were you corporal, lance corporals, sergeant?
We'd been promoted to sergeant just prior to selection. And then, so we went on as, selection as senior NCOs. And then the battalion needed some patrol commanders, obviously with some background, some experience. So I quickly learnt that I was going to recon platoon. We had about 6 months on the ground, and then quickly into East Timor. So again, there were some challenges there. I guess a new guy coming to the unit, trying to mould a team together of senior guys who had been in the unit in various timeframes before me was a bit of a challenge. In terms of leadership, it definitely challenged my leadership style. But I was really fortunate to have a really robust patrol 2IC. So I guess for force protection, our traditionally recon patrols are 5 to 6 men, probably down to 4 if you need to. But for force protection, the structure of our patrols was 9 men, which gave us the capacity to break down into 2, like a 5 and a 4 man team if we needed to. But essentially we rolled out into the field probably 70%-ish of the time as a 9-man team. A lot of our tasks were observation onto the East Timor Indonesian border.
This is, full deep camming up and stealth jungle movements and creatively rigging communication equipment up trees to listen in and all these kind of shenanigans, right?
Absolutely. Overt observation posts, winning water locally from the tactical control line, which was a river between East Timor and Indonesia at the time. The weather conditions were extreme. Like most of the times we were rappelling or inserting by helos, and it was lay up, try and minimise water intake during the day, 35, 40 degrees. Humidity was extreme. And anywhere from sort of 7 to 10 and sometimes 14 days in the field with 1 or 2 resupplies or winning water locally was our task. Quite hard to stay undetected. So generally, part of your kit when you went field was, you make sure you had your blue cap in your pocket. So if times were, okay, we've been compromised, we've been compromised again. Okay, we're not really being effective, being covert. Let's clean the camouflage off our face, put our United Nations caps on and our armbands, and we'd go overt, which was still quite effective. We were still able to, we were effective in the field. We were still able to overtly conduct observation onto the TCL, the tactical control line between East Timor and Indonesia. And we were able to do some hearts and minds and gain some information from the villages as well, in terms of they would, put us up for the night in one of their huts and feed us, and discussions and information gathering took place overtly.
It's a good fallback position. If it's not quite working, you can just go from commando to peacekeeper and still project that force and have that on-the-ground presence, still gather some of that info. And what was it like with the local Timorese people? I imagine feeling reassured and happy to have you there, and it's been that stabilizing factor.
Nothing but, open hospitality to us. They were very welcoming. They had a lot of questions about, our sort of long-term goals and, what we wanted to achieve. And again, their, passage of information wasn't great. So they didn't know a lot with what was going on outside of their village or back down into the more populated, places like Gili and stuff. So they'd be constantly asking us questions about, what's happening here, what's happening there, and what are you guys doing? Can you influence this? What are you doing about this situation? So, patrol commanders or junior NCOs quickly had to shift to, being able to educationally answer those questions, which had a big impact on, the way we conducted ourselves and operations in East Timor.
Well, you are a thinking soldier in the way you have to be creative and have initiative with this kind of thing. So that's just a further extension of that, to be able to talk diplomatically and informedly so with the local population. We spoke before about the work you were doing with Recon Platoon in Somalia, and now you're doing equivalent work but at the commando level. And although the mission's different, the country's different, all those particulars aside, you're now doing it at that higher echelon. How did that compare for you? Different countries a few years later, but also just operating at that different echelon.
I've reflected on this quite a number of times, and I think being in Recon Platoon in Somalia, humanitarian operations, even though we were conducting, observation posts and close reconnaissance, I guess being a private soldier, and my focus was sort of here as opposed to being, a senior NCO on a humanitarian operation in East Timor, where my focus was out here.
It's gone from a real narrow lens to a real wide lens, big picture.
Absolutely.
Approach.
I've got all these resources. This is obviously East Timor. I've got 9 men to think about, technology. We've got other SF organisations who are operating in and around us. How do we deal with them? The complexities of leadership, platoon headquarters, our relationship with the rest of the battalion, our relationship with battalion headquarters. So I learned some really valuable lessons during that period of time. And again, being relatively new to the unit, as in for our commando, but I had a lot of peers, the Western Hennessy's, the Mick Slomans, the Bram Conleys, to sort of lean on, and we bounced ideas around us at times. And, my platoon sergeant, a guy by the name of Reece Stewart, extremely experienced, infantryman. And
very well regarded today, very highly regarded.
Reece is one of those guys who, you don't need to, maintain constant conversational contact, but you always know you can rely on him. And he was our platoon sergeant, and he was just solid. You ever needed to bounce anything off him, or you ever needed some feedback, or you wanted to know where you stood, Reece would just give it to you. He's obviously he's still extremely highly regarded in the commando community today. So it was great having guys like that around, just to sort of pick their brains and just confide in at times in terms of leadership or leadership issues. So really robust lessons learned.
So you get these great on-the-ground experiences in Timor, and then it's not too long after that the world changes with the September 11 attacks, and I guess the remit of your job expands exponentially, and sort of the potential for what that might mean. Obviously, as a country, we very quickly deploy SAS over to Afghanistan, and the Commandos, I can imagine you guys gearing up, getting ready for your turn in the sandpit, so to speak. And then it all really sort of kicks off there with the raising of the Tactical Assault Group East, counter-terrorism element, which I know you're a part of, and then commando involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. So before we get to the Middle East itself, can you just talk me through those tumultuous years of change and sort of the counter-terrorism capability and just the mindset shift in what your day-to-day life looks like back home?
A really unique experience for me, 9/11, in that my patrol was in the field. We'd just deployed to the field. I think it was the night before 9/11 went down.
East Timor.
And again, strangely enough, I had Reece. Reece is with my patrol, and we're just launched into the field, and we're due to spend I think 7 days into the field. And obviously on that first afternoon, 9/11 goes down. So we get extracted out of the field after sort of about 72 hours, thinking, hang on a second, we're supposed to have another 3 to 4 days. What's going on? Quickly get back to our HQ location, and then the platoon commander pulls us into the office and said, "Hey boys, this has gone down. This went down 48 hours ago." So we knew nothing of 9/11 for essentially post 48 hours till it went down, until we got back to the HQ location. So yeah, it was like, like everyone says, it was just, a bit surreal, or was surreal at the time, sort of trying to look at the images and process what was going on, in the rest of the world. Like, what's happening back in Australia? Is my family okay? Is the world at war now? Like, we're in this isolated, deployment in East Timor, and then all of a sudden the world's caught fire, so to speak. So yeah, it was a time of change and a time of uncertainty, and a time of just trying to fight for information on what was going on in the world. There was lots of, I guess, courses of action going down in terms of, okay, who's going to volunteer? This tactical assault group East Coast is going to be raised. There was only a limited number who sort of could line up for that. I had gone prior to my deployment into East Timor, I had some personal stuff that I had needed to deal with back in Australia. So I made the hard choice not to be part of that, I guess, first rotation of guys who were going to go back to Sydney, then on to Perth to do the tactical assault training. So the first aircraft of lads went back, and then, it was the rest of us eventually rolled out, and they're off doing, obviously, their piece with the tactical assault group. I had some courses I need to pick up in terms of my reinforcement cycle as well. So the Rio cycle kicked off again. Iraq started to come onto the horizon again. So there's sort of like about a 12 or 18-month period for me where I was sort of busy with reinforcement cycle, doing all my courses. Lads are off doing tag skills and build-up. And then towards the end of 2002, I was in Bravo Company as a team commander when we got the word that we're off to Iraq, or, getting in country where, the locations that we went to posture for the Iraq invasion. So again, it was just like, from the time we got back from East Timor to, getting ready for Iraq, it's sort of like 18 months, probably close to 2 years for me. But my feet didn't really touch the ground. I was just extremely busy with courses and, preparing my own men, my own team within a commando platoon to roll into Iraq.
Well, it doesn't really stop for you since you put your hand up to do commandos, because you do the preparation and selection and get ready in that. Then you're in Timor for 9/11, and then what you just described, all the courses there, and then Iraq. And so when you first get to Iraq, it's not quite going to Timor. It is far away, other side of the world, and the Middle East has its other, I guess, history there as well with war and warfare. What's your response internally? How do you feel when you find yourself on the plane there or on the ground there?
Yeah, so my focus was to look after my team, make sure we were prepared as best we could, and obviously the platoon as well. We worked some massive hours back in Australia in preparation. So we're talking about sort of December 2002 at the moment. Working massive hours to prepare ourselves, again, just fighting information, fighting for equipment, to best prepare ourselves for operations in Iraq. We went on a little bit of leave, came back sort of early January, again, sort of 4 to 6 weeks of training, and then we flew out of Sydney on Valentine's Day in 2003.
Romantic.
It's so romantic, yeah. And there were so many unknowns, what our jobs were we going to get deployed, we're the new kids on the block in terms of an SF organisation, posturing with a squadron of warfighting veterans from the Special Air Service Regiment. So it was a challenging time to keep the lads focused, because there was lots of talk of, us being in a support role and the squadron doing all the heavy lifting in Iraq. It was a challenge to keep the lads focused and, tune them in. And we went through a number of locations in Jordan, through that area in terms of training and being postured for the launch of operations over the border into Iraq.
And what were those operations that you were conducting in Iraq in the end?
To be honest, we really only rolled out one operation, which was into an airfield. Once the squadron had secured the airfield, a platoon or two platoons of commandos went in and did some, I guess, relief in place in terms of, so that allow the squadron to move on to their next mission. We were on the ground for, I think it was about a week or so, whilst operations were being conducted around us. And it was a really interesting time because you could sense the battle going on around us, and there was aircraft, and the skies would get lit up at night on the horizon. So we're in the middle of this conflict, but not in great threat ourselves. We're like, okay, what's next? Are we going to step up? Are we going to conduct some operations with the squadron from SASR? Are we here for a long duration of time? Are we securing? What are we actually doing? And that, again, pretty quickly got flipped on its head. And I think it was probably about 3, 4, maybe a month after the initial invasion into, across the border into Iraq, we found ourselves on a plane back home, sort of mid 2003 at this stage.
And it's some time before you find yourself back there in Afghanistan, but that's not to say that in the interim you're resting on your laurels. That's still very 9/11, still very recent mentality and state of the world, and continuing to build the commando capability for TAG East. I know that you guys were integral for the Commonwealth Games in 2006. Can you talk to me a bit about just that ongoing maintaining peak excellence performance for domestic security as well, and what that looks like for you?
TAG is very quickly getting upskilled, and the TTP, so tactics, techniques and procedures of how a TAG is postured and holding area routine, and the different, niche operations within a TAG's capability. We've got a company group at this stage, who are holding that responsibility. We were we're talking like 2002, 2004. We didn't really start to do company rotations of TAG until probably like 2009. So it was just to trickle in. Guys would go and do their CQB course, their advanced CQB course, their specialist courses, ready to serve in TAG. And then it was a trickle system in and then a trickle system out of guys rotating in, just to hold that capability to the best it could be. So the unit was just nowhere near capable or in a position to do company rotations at this stage. So, guys would obviously, as I said, go and do their courses, get the opportunity to trickle in, guys would trickle out. We quickly obviously brought the clearance divers on board and training those guys up, CQB, ACQB, them holding, again, different niche capability skills for tasks inside the TAG. So all the organisations are busy doing their TAG East niche skills. The TAG is located up at Luscombe Field. The rest of the units down at in the lines at Holsworthy and Tobruk line. So there's this dislocation. The TAG's up there, the rest of the units down there. So it was a bit of an us and them thing at times, depending which role that you're in at the time. Which looking back in hindsight, probably caused a little bit of friction and a little bit of what are you guys doing and what are you guys doing? Obviously, Bravo Company was lucky enough, well, not lucky enough, but, given the honour to deploy into Iraq. And, obviously there's guys looking over the fence going, well, why didn't I get picked for Iraq? Well, you're doing TAG duties. That's your responsibility for the next 12 or 18 months. So, yeah, there's a little bit of, bedding in to be done is probably a good term in terms of this is where we want to get to. We want to get to a position where we've got guys doing or prepared for operations domestically, being TAG. We want guys to be prepared to deploy overseas at short notice, whether that's Iraq, Afghanistan, protective security detachments, and then we want some guys to have a period of time where they can do some professional development, i.e. promotion courses. So I guess there was always that struggle, and I don't think it really got bedded into sort of 2007, maybe 2008, where we had that cycle of, okay, you go and do domestic CT for 12 months. You'll then do 6 months lead-in and then a time frame of 6 months deployment into Afghanistan, been out 3 to 4 months or a period of time for leave, professional development, and then you're back to phase one where you'll support domestic CT. So
you were helping build the wheel of how this all works, and you're in those early stages of when it was still under construction.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it was a long process and a lot of planning and, some really smart, key, influential commanding officers and, officers commanding of the commando company groups and, the COs at the time, really smart guys who had, were forward leaning on, we need a solution. So yeah, it was certainly interesting times, a lot of time, a lot of stress on, families, because guys were away for crazy amounts of time, whether it was supporting the domestic duties, whether you were preparing for Afghanistan, in Afghanistan, promotion courses. It was just like months away. But, that's what we did. That's what we were SF soldiers for is we wanted that challenge. We wanted to be on the forefront. We wanted to be deployed. We wanted to be doing tactical assault group duties. Because if the unit wasn't going to offer it to us, guys would get out and find that somewhere else, or they'd go to Perth and do selection. Rewarding, but challenging 4 to 6 years between sort of 2003 up to sort of 2007, 2008 for the regiment.
Because we don't have to get into it, but it is a kind of funny switch where so many people aspire to pass selection and get into special forces, and there's a great sort of bottleneck, and it's a great famous, difficulty, a huge thing to surmount. But then once you get through that and you get the training, you get qualified and get a bit of experience and reputation, then your options open up a bit more. And that, yes, there's Commandos, there's SAS, there's a lot of private contract work that could be done, not just and outside of Australia as well. So then it's more your oyster to make of it, and you're wanting to retain that talent and that skill set and that mileage for the benefit of what is not a fledgling unit by that point, but still, young compared to, say, the SAS.
It's an interesting point because, I often say it to other guys, if we're not offered that challenge, and I sort of briefly touched on it earlier, if we're not offered that challenge as SF soldiers in our current units, we're going to go somewhere else and strive for that challenge. SASR went through, I guess, an exodus of middle management leaving post-Iraq because, it was like the guys got a little bit of a taste, and, then there was opportunities to go into some private security and, in Iraq and Afghanistan. Massive, massive coin. Obviously, there's, risks involved. And I think Commando has probably gone through that at a couple of stages where we're sort of in between Iraq and we're not really involved in Afghanistan. And then there's that sort of 2 or 3 years where guys are like, well, that's it. Iraq was our opportunity. I'm now going to get out and, chase some coin, chase some, some good jobs overseas in the private security world. And then sort of 2005, we get a little taste of Afghanistan again, but then it really kicks off sort of back end of 2006 and, up until, probably 2014 and later on, back into Iraq for us.
What you were speaking about before about the sort of the rotation through and the challenges of keeping your men focused and all that, what strikes me there in your description, Ant, is that you're not just got your own career to focus on here, but you are so focused on the well-being of your men and their career and their professional development. And you've had that since, you're just conscious of your 9-man patrol in Timor and how much that widens your lens and sort of what you're keeping on top of the situation there. And then it's happening again in Iraq and while at TAG. And so you've really got this strong sense of leadership, of responsibility, of tribe, as is a word that's used a lot with the military and special forces in particular, I guess. And then you have, years of fostering this tribe. And then it's in, I think, is it 2008, 2009, you find yourself with this tribe heading back into conflict in the Middle East, in Afghanistan specifically.
It's a really interesting point, Alex. Like that tribe, that team first mentality, that want to look after your mates it's born from hardship. It's born from death and dying. It's born from doing those hard yards, as a private soldier, as a lance corporal, as a junior NCO, as a senior NCO, and then, back into my career as a warrant officer, wanting to look after everyone around me before myself. It's that team first mentality, which a lot of people, they try and do, but it's one of those things. It's easier to talk about and it's easier to say, oh yeah, team first, but it's hard. And it's not only hard on the individual, hard on myself, but it's hard on my family because I got to make sacrifices. I'm sacrificing myself. I'm sacrificing time with my family, but this is where I want to be. This is where I need to be. I've got to look after my men. I've got to look after my team.
Well, they're your other family too, and not to disparage your family, but then they're another form of family as well that you have different but similar strength of ties to.
At the time, it's quite selfish, mate, to be honest. Like, I put my career and my team and obviously later on, as a company sergeant major within, Commando Regiment, I put all that first before my family because I had to. Because if you're not doing that, and you're not doing the job to the best of your ability, to be honest.
Well, you've gone from a 9-man patrol. Level of responsibility keeps increasing from patrol level to a platoon level, company sergeant major, company level. And yet I can tell you're a very empathetic individual. And so that responsibility, that drive to do the best for your men, that's only been intensified by having more men to do your best for.
2006, 2007, I posted to the Royal Military College, Duntroon, as a warrant officer. Spent 12 months as in the Royal Military College headquarters, and then my second 12 months, I was a small group instructor in first class, which is their last 6 months before the officers graduate. So I learned some absolutely fantastic lessons about leadership, and was able to pass on my own leadership lessons to the young officers prior to graduation. But I was supposed to go into a different job back into the regiment. I guess some manning issues sort of spiked up, and then I quickly found myself as CSM of Bravo Company with 12 months to get ready for Afghanistan for our deployment, sort of commencing February 2009. So again, 2008. A blur of, preparation, exercises, maintaining currency, getting guys current, training our JTACs, which are, the Joint Terminal Air Control guys who control the aircraft to support us when we're on the ground. All those bolt-on assets that make up a Commando Company group, which is essentially probably 130, 140 men, full capability-wise in terms of, a Commando Company group rolling into Afghanistan. Incident Response Regiment is raising their capability and supporting us. So there's lots of plugins, lots of resourcing problems, solutions, being sought, supporting the officer commanding. But, we had a fantastic 12 months. We were prepared and primed, ready to roll back end of 2008. Bravo Company had conducted, some really successful operations on their previous rotation, 2007. Unfortunately, we suffered the death of Luke Worsley, who was killed in 2007 with Bravo Company. And a lot of those soldiers, junior NCOs, senior NCOs, had sort of stepped up into the new positions, promoted. So we had taken on little reinforcements. So the company pretty much looked exactly the same as it was 2007 going into 2008. We did take on about 12 Rios they'd just finished a reinforcement cycle, and there was a bit of toing and froing in terms of where they were going to go, but we took on 12 guys. I think it was about March, April 2008. So they had about eight or 9 months with us straight off the back of a reinforcement cycle to train with their call signs ready for operations in Afghanistan, started 2009. So, I look back now and it was just like, it's just a blur, but some of my best times soldiering was in that period of time.
A blur of training and hard work is very much a theme of your career so far. And
yeah. Yeah.
I guess, can you give me an overview of your time in Afghanistan, what the situation like then is on the ground at that point, the work Bravo Company is assigned to do, and some of the memorable moments from that trip?
The company was sort of complete on the ground around about February, sort of back end of February 2009, and quickly gone, into, certification training, make sure we were certified, a couple of nursery, I guess, with the company that's going out, I guess the key leadership within Bravo Company would go out and accompany these guys on what we term nursery patrols or operations, missions, etc. So again, because we had so much corporate knowledge from a previous rotation, 2007, and it's now 2009, that corporate knowledge was still apparent. We had new Alphas and Bravos, being the platoon commanders and platoon sergeants in the Commando platoons, but there was a lot of knowledge in terms of some really robust, smart, just absolute team commanders who were absolute thrusters, absolute warfighters, who had covered themselves in nothing but glory on previous rotations, and their time in TAG had really postured them well. So our first operation was outside of our AO in Tarankout. Close to us was another large force who were conducting a relief in place of a large scale of their force. So we were tasked with disruption operations down in the Shambrack Valley. So through Shambrack Valley into Helmand Valley to conduct some disruption. So these guys could obviously relief in place, as in go home. The new lads were coming in. So we spent the best part of probably 2 weeks preparing vehicles, ammunition, rations, resupply. It was going to be an extended operation. We were told to plan for 30 days outside the wire, which is a significant amount of time, on the go, outside the wire, high threat warfighting environment. So for me, I guess there was a lot of unknowns in terms of how to prepare. There was a lot of, guidance provided, and just leaning forward and finding solutions to problems to prepare us as best we could for an extended operation. So this is, obviously 2009, we're cruising around in, SRVs, light skin vehicles. We had 4 Bushmasters within the company at this time. So, SRVs, the LRPVs, which were for our mortars and our four-wheel motorbikes as well. So extremely busy period of time. Felt like it was a blur, trying to get my feet on the ground, trying to understand the flow of operations in Afghanistan. And then obviously we've got this massive operation, extended period of time that we're going to roll outside the wire for.
Because it's interesting that by this point you've been in the military over 20 years. You're very experienced, but you're always learning, and that's because you're in a new role or you're conducting a new kind of operation or you're in a new country or all the above, and it's just you're always being challenged to use your deep reservoir of knowledge and skills, but also it still actually challenges you in turn.
Yeah. I mean, as a soldier, junior NCO, senior NCO, officer, junior officer, senior officer, we probably more so in special operations, you never stop learning, being a sponge. And like I say to a lot of guys, even, the work I do now is, be a sponge, always be fighting for information to better yourself, to better your organisation, to better your team. So I felt like that was my job as the company sergeant major, was to be the man behind the scenes, just being the grey man, but making sure all those boxes were ticked. The preparation, the detailed preparation into our rehearsals, which is a great strength of, special operations, is the detail we put into our rehearsals. I just wanted to be busy, prepared, because I knew if I was, all my call signs that, I was supporting essentially, and all the lads I was supporting would be as well. So yeah, crazy, busy, but super enjoyable times.
Absolutely. And this 2009 operations in Afghanistan have been going for a while. So I imagine my understanding of this period is you're starting to have more measurable effects on quality of life for the local population. You guys are at a level, you're doing your jobs that professionally, that well. There must have been a lot of professional and personal gratification and satisfaction in that you're on the ground, you feel like you're making a difference, you can see those impacts in real time.
Absolutely. Like to see the company who was there, they were obviously ripping out as we were coming in, and the professionalism of these guys, and in the handover brief, some I guess data of what they'd achieved during their 4 months on the ground. And it was just like, okay, we've got our hands full here, but we're more than prepared to conduct, special operations in Afghanistan to, support the Australian mission or, coalition mission in Afghanistan. So yeah, it was exciting times. And I think, going into that first job, there was a lot of, not hesitation, but just unknowns for myself in terms of, what we needed to do or how we need to prepare. But saying that, we were prepared, we were ready, we're ready to roll outside the wire once we got, the go for that first mission. So exciting times.
And is this first mission when Sergeant Brett Till is killed? Because just looking at sort of the timeline of when you arrive and the 19th of March when he passes, I wonder if that's an overlap there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was an extremely challenging time. I guess to take a step back, we rolled outside the wire, I think it was late on the 17th, moved through our AO and we're entering the Shambrack Valley, and which was, named IED Valley because of the IED threat was so high. And we quickly found ourselves with, 45 plus vehicles, 5 to 10 metres apart, big Congo line of commando operators in vehicles moving through the Shambrack Valley, which there are some pictures of the Shambrack Valley, but it's like, it's nothing like I've seen here in Australia. It's like these massive spur lines either side, and it's this bowl in the middle, and it's probably, at its widest, probably, 3 to 5 kilometres on the base, and then you've got these massive high ground. So you always felt like someone's watching us. And there was always this threat of, being engaged or, a remote firing of an IED. So, Dan and his team did an outstanding job pathfinding for us, through the Shambrack Valley. We essentially went at walking pace for 24 hours. We were in tick a couple of times. And it was the morning of the 19th when, I think it was about 9:30, when Brett and his team were clearing out the front, and he came across an IED, attempted to neutralise it, attempted to lift it. Unfortunately, he was too close to the IED when it detonated, and he was instantly killed. So I guess for me, that had a massive impact. And that happened in 2009, and it's we're in 2022 now. So period of time has passed there, but it's always been really hard for me to talk about. And to be honest, I've only been able to talk about it probably the last sort of 3 or 4 years. It was an extremely trying time for me. as the company sergeant major and dealing with death and dying at any stage of an operation, but at such an early stage of a protracted 30-plus day operation in the field. We've had a KIA, killed in action. It probably impacted me far more looking back now in hindsight than I'd sort of anticipated, to be honest. And as I said, it was an extremely challenging time, day 2 or 3 into a protracted operation. But, we quickly repostured, did what we needed to do to get Brett out of the field and, continue on with operations.
You talk about being surprised or how much it affected you. And it's one of those things where you're a smart guy, you know that you're going to Afghanistan and special forces, that the possibility of casualty is there. It's already been happening during the time Australia's been over there. So intellectually, you know this may occur. And obviously, Brett himself, an explosive ordnance disposal technician, the risk for his job is very real. But then the actual reality of it happening. We spoke earlier about you preparing your mental toughness for commando selection because you knew there was something to mentally prepare, but losing someone like that, that's not something you can mentally prepare for. You can't know or forecast how you're going to feel about the situation or how hard it's going to hit you. But then you got to also have the pressure of you've got everyone else there to look after and the operation's still happening. You got to keep going. Yeah,
that's what it quickly turned into is there's nothing we can do for Brett now. We've evacuated him from the field. We're not going to get the opportunity to, farewell him back in TK on the ramp ceremony. So we reflected at different times in the field, which was extremely challenging. But it quickly turned into, okay, I've now got to support the lads, going through their own grieving process. Dan and his team from, IRR. It's beyond words how, they just got on with the mission after losing Brett. We're all challenged. We didn't really get the opportunity to grieve or reflect a month after when we sort of rolled out of the field and back into TK after being on continuous operations for a month. That was just how the cookie crumbled for us in terms of being able to grieve and pay our respects to Brett, and I guess for certain guys to be able to communicate back home to his family and things like that. So yeah, it was, as I said, like probably one of the most challenging times in my career, to be honest. It was that period of time.
Because that happens early in that specific operation. It happens early in your deployment. I guess, how does that shape the rest of your time in Afghanistan? I mean, how much longer are you there for, and how does that affect, not just in terms of your mental health or you grieving and thinking about Brett specifically, but also just generally how you've then got to carry on your remaining commando duties and leadership and responsibility and care for the other men. The missions don't change, but you've got I'm sure, or this extra weight or burden of wanting to keep everyone safe.
Yeah, totally. Like there's probably things I should have done that I didn't do, and there's probably things I did that I shouldn't have done, post that time of losing Brett. Damien Tomlinson, his vehicle ran over an IED 4 days after Brett was killed. It was about 2nd or 3rd of April, and Brett was killed on the 19th of March. So 2 significant challenges for the company to sort of deal with. That night, conducting some pretty aggressive operations against the Taliban down in Helmand Valley. And the course line was broken up into a different shape. Course lines operating independently in support of each other. And obviously Brett's vehicle runs over an IED and he loses both his legs and one of his arms. The guys who worked tirelessly that night, we had a doctor with us as part of our numbers, Doc, and the medics and the combat first aiders who worked with great courage and skill and honour to save life that night. And we had him out of the field on an aircraft, going back to TK within about 56 minutes post-blast. So when we talk about the golden hour of getting someone out of the field, we tick that box, and at the end of the day, probably saved his life. It's kind of weird. I don't even know how to put it in words. It's not weird, but, one of the lads who played an integral part in saving his life, Scotty Palmer, he was killed a couple of years later in an aircraft crash. So, I've spent some time with Scotty's dad, Ray, and it's just plays on your mind, or it's you can sort of sit back and smile and go, well, Scotty did his job. He saved Damo's life, and he loses his own life. So, but again, it's part of being a soldier and being a special forces soldier. It's what we do. We do our job to the highest of our ability, regardless of the situation, and we always put our teammates first.
Well, on that sentiment there, and what's a moment you look back on from that Afghanistan deployment just with joy, pride at what you and your men achieved? What's something you look back there and go, I'm so proud of how they conducted themselves that day, or how we did in this engagement or this operation, or what's a moment you look back on like that?
A funny but a warm, fuzzy feeling I got was, again, it was on this same operation down in Helmand Valley, and we'd been out in the field for about 15 days at this time. So I think it was our first or second resupply. And resupply occurred by American C-130 aircraft. You can imagine 40 or about 45 vehicles, give or take 100 or so commandos. Resupply is fairly large. So the C-130 or C-130s to supply us on the ground with fuel, ammunition, food, resources, consumables. It was about 12 pallet loads of equipment to resupply us, engine parts, spare tyres. The terrain was extremely hard on the vehicles, so we've got diffs being replaced, motors being replaced. It's massive. We do our resups at night, and the aircraft would fly in at about 1,000 feet. We'd secure like a large area and, establish comms 20 minutes out, 5 minutes out, and then they'd light up the drop zone with IR. This particular night, and obviously that's the primary role of, well, not the primary, but one of the roles of the company sergeant major is to make sure this resupply gets to us. This particular night, I can't get comms with the aircraft, and I'm fighting for comms, and I've got the company SIG, and we've got all these SIGs chasing around trying to get call signs, raise this, raise that. But it came back to the SOPs that we'd established with the American aircraft was, if we can't establish communications 60 seconds before the aircraft is due to drop, we'll light up an IR strobe. And they said, yeah, man, you know how Americans talk. Goddamn, man, we'll drop on that, IR strobe. If you light it up 60 seconds, or, whatever out, we'll drop. And I'm like, right, we're fighting for comms, and I'm looking at the watch, and it's just counting down. And all the boys are out running security, and I can hear the aircraft, and I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm just gonna light this IR strobe in the middle of the DZ, and I hope they drop. Counting down time, and I light up the strobe, and then these aircraft closely followed about 1,000 feet, maybe even lower, might have been 1,000 to 500 feet, but it seemed like we could reach out and almost touch them. They dropped 12 pallet loads worth of equipment, and it fell on the ground within about 500 to 700 metres of spacing.
Convenient.
We relied on our training and our SOPs, our standard operating procedures, and our rehearsals. Everything sort of came together. So whilst it wasn't a in contact or in combat situation, I guess as the company sergeant major, it was a moment for me of being able to do my job, so the guys could have all their resources, and we could continue to fight the fight on the ground, for another sort of 2 weeks. So, and off the back of that, obviously you can imagine 14 pallets and all the rubbish and equipment that it leaves. Steve, the OC, said to me, and I sort of said to him, what are we going to do with all this, pallets and parachutes and rigging, and it's this massive pile. I said to him, look, we can light it and we can just burn it, and we'll continue off, we'll drive off, and it'll be destroyed. We'll put some thermite grenades in there, we'll just light this thing up. The last vehicle out of the vehicle drop-off point happened to be Cam Baird's vehicle this night. So he was tasked with lighting this almighty flame in the middle of Helmand Valley. And I remember driving out and giving Cam the nod. We're all under NVGs and stuff, and it's dark and required, and maintaining tactical advantage. And then this almighty fire erupts in the middle of Helmand Valley, and it pretty much lights up the valley like a candle. Just the look on Cam's face, he's just got this chuckle and his smile as we drive off into the darkness. So it was a moment of humour, I think, for the rest of the company.
Well, and that Afghanistan deployment obviously is a significant experience for you and the men you were over there with. You do the job correctly, successful each time, as you said. You come home and your career in the military continues. Deployments to the Middle East continue. And I know there's been various other veterans I've interviewed on this podcast that have been in those subsequent deployments, and the service of the 2nd Commando Regiment is ongoing, outstanding. It bears cost and sacrifice, something we're all familiar with, which leads a bit into some of the work you're doing today, which I'll get to in a sec. But just to acknowledge, you continue your own outstanding service. You finish up in the Army as the Special Operations Liaison Officer with AFP Counter-Terrorism. Now, today, you're a high-performance consultant for the Canberra Raiders rugby league team. Another major piece of work you do is your advocacy for the Commando Welfare Trust, and I was hoping you could talk to me a bit more about the trust and some of the importance of that work. And I guess this, for me, this comes back to your passion for your tribe, for those men and their families, and doing right by them. And I can sort of see that link from your own service history into why you do that work now. So can you speak more to that for me, please?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't really have apart from Mark Smethurst, who's obviously, leads the trust, and, his name goes without speak in terms of, the special operations community here in Australia, but not only in Australia, but within the US as well, like highly respected, a man, and a leader, probably one of our finest. I don't really have a formal, function or role within the Commando Welfare Trust. Sort of towards the back end of my career, I found myself, my mental health was really, really challenged from deployments and, all through my career. And I found it quite cathartic to physically challenge myself, but at the same time to raise awareness and money for the Commando Welfare Trust. So that sort of started probably back in 2007 when I was posted to the Royal Military College. I got a bunch of lads, and long story short, we essentially rode our bikes from Norseman in WA to Ceduna in South Australia, across the Nullarbor Plain, west to east, 12 days, about 1,300 kilometres, raising awareness and money for Commando Welfare Trust. We raised about 35 grand for the trust, which again, it isn't a massive amount of money, but Mark Smethurst tells me every time, I do a fundraiser, every dollar counts for the trust, and it's not only the dollars, it's the awareness as well. That was an outstanding 20 odd days. Every morning I'd read the record of service out to one of the lads we'd lost. And obviously back in, 2007, we hadn't lost as many lads as we have today. So, but it was a moment of reflection before we jumped on our bikes and, rode our 100 odd Ks for the day. And again, I've done various, physical challenges, because I find, again, that principle of team first, it's my way of giving back to support the widows and the children of the lads we've lost in, Afghanistan and some other locations as well. So again, there's no formal part that I play with the Commando Welfare Trust, but it's just my way of fighting some of my own demons by giving back to the trust.
Well, it's wonderful that you're able to find that cathartic healing process in a benevolent way that you are. And I can imagine, even say with your work with the Raiders, you can apply that military mentality, that classic daily renewable contract mentality from Commandos into their teamwork as well as the team first ethos. So it's wonderful that your career has had many highs, it's had some lows, but you're able to channel so much of that for good going forward into your life and to the benefit of others as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really coincidence that, and I think we often say it in hindsight, but everything you do in your career leads to opportunities at that time. And that's pretty much what the opportunity gave me with the Raiders. What I bring to them is it's all military, not skills, but military knowledge and mindset and, mental preparation and breathing and controlled breathing and controlling your anxiety in those moments. And I always felt that I had some knowledge, some attributes, some skills to pass on to a professional organisation, but I never sought it out. And I guess, to be honest, I never really thought it was going to come to reality, but it's an absolute outstanding environment to work in. I guess it's a bit surreal. I grew up, supporting the Raiders. To have an opportunity to, support their day-to-day running and the training and, what we're trying to achieve within the club each year. Some days I'm driving into work and I'm pinching myself that, a fortunate position to be in, and I cherish it every day.
Well, Ant, I am sure your Uncle Don would be so proud of you and all you achieved in your career. But with that in mind, would 16-year-old Ant be more impressed by all that you've achieved for the Commando career or the Raiders Association?
I'm pretty sure it'd be for the Raiders, but no, I'm extremely lucky. But, you make your own luck, as they say. I've worked hard. I've always tried to do my best. Haven't always made the right decisions or, had the right outcome, but I've always, every day I've gone to work, I've always strived for excellence. And I think if people can do that or, hold that value close to their thought process or close to their heart, they'll be winning each day.
Well, Ant, those are some great lessons that I'm sure our listeners can take with them and reflect on. Thank you so much for your service and your time today.
Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate it.
I'm Alex Lloyd, and you've been listening to Life on the Line.
Well, I've tried to forget how I've tried. The day my best mate put his life on the line.
More of that track in just a moment. Our thanks go to Ant for coming on the show. Keep an eye out on his social media at ant_plater on Instagram for updates on his own show, Double Tap, the Operators Podcast. For other episodes with Somalia veterans who later went into Commandos, in Season 3, check out number 47, Bram Connolly.
Well, these guys didn't ask my permission, they just shot him. 1,400 metres, clean kill, and the bomber stopped.
And number 54, H Volume 1.
We're going through that door, or we're sliding down that rope, or we're blowing this, or we're diving in here, or flying in there, or whatever, and this is it. It doesn't matter how many of us come out.
For a deeper insight into Somalia, listen to the Season 5 interview, number 106, Greg Hopgood.
All you could see was just kids, just like their bodies were like shrink wrap, no nourishment at all, and no hair. It was just like skin over bone.
To learn more about Tag East, in Season 4, check out number 97, Paul Cale.
And then we hit into this open creek line and got hammered by a machine gun, and then just made our way over to a flank to sort of get out of that killing ground.
And to hear the inspiring story of Damien Tomlinson from the man himself, check out in audio or on YouTube our video podcast, number 105, Damien Tomlinson.
He was watching it and he got to watch my car explode. The issue with something like that happening is everyone in a huge radius has heard it. You know, if they're ready for us to be coming down, they now know where we are.
Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions. Artwork by Big Cat Design. Theme music by Dan Van Werkhoven. Closing music, The Hell Beyond, by The Externals, a track inspired by this podcast. Thank you for listening, and lest we forget.
A man sure walks slow, might his step be your last. It can steal the mind quickly, and it can harden your heart. And you yearn for your family, and you long for your wife, and all that you're missing from a wonderful life. But out here I'm a soldier and a long way from home, and I gave up those comforts a long time ago. Out here in the dirt and the heat and the dry, there's no time for nostalgia unless it blankens your mind. Just then I looked round and I caught Rowdy's eyes, and it snapped me back quicker than he raised up his sights. He squeezed off some rounds from behind a mud wall as I dived to me guts and I started to crawl. Well, I've tried to forget how I tried, but I'll never forget how the fear stole my mind. The cornfields erupted. Shit scared with self-doubt. My throat was bone dry and me heart filled me mouth. As the shots cracked around us, I remember the high, but it wasn't excitement, I was just terrified. The steel tore through clothing, mud walls, trees and flesh, as I emptied my bag towards nothing at best. And as I crawled forward and I looked through my sights, I turned and saw Rowdy give a wink and a smile. He shouted with me as he sprung to his feet with his gun up and firing out into the green and the dirt all around him like rain on a pond as he made his way into the hell just beyond. Well, I've tried to forget how I've tried, but it's hard to forget such a beautiful sight. We got up and followed through machine guns and fire. I remember the dust, how the grit cut me eyes. We battled and fought through the streets, maze and mud. And when I reached Rowdy, he was covered in blood. I crawled up beside him and I laid by his side. Not sure it was sweat or tears stinging his eyes. He grabbed for my hand and he winced through a smile as the din all around him fell silent and quiet. Oh, well, I've tried to forget how I've tried, but I'll never forget the day Rowdy died. The bird dusted off, me best mate in a bag, as I licked at a rollie and we passed round a drag. We picked up and moved, we were dog-tired and beat. We were the dreaming awake and the walking asleep. As I sat with a beer, looking over the dash, and I drank and I pondered the shit day we'd had. But nothing like Rowdy, so I raised up my glass and I whispered to old mate it was over too fast.